My Philosophy and Practice of Aging, The Art of Dementia, by author Itsuki Hiroyuki. Itsuki Hiroyuki discusses ways of thinking that should be discarded immediately to prevent elderly people from becoming unhuman. As we age, we will eventually face dementia. Rather than denying it, how can we live by accepting aging and physical and mental decline? Such a perspective is needed now. Author Itsuki Hiroyuki offers wisdom for dementia in a better way. Dementia is a myriad of different types. What is desirable dementia? Sometimes, dementia is seen as a spring breeze of tranquility. On the other hand, there are also cases where parents become violent, hurling insults at caregivers, or engaging in eccentric behavior. As long as dementia does not lead to such violent behavior, it can be considered a desirable type. We often hear tragic stories of families with dementia. Certainly, misery is one aspect of dementia. However, I think it's simplistic to simply think of dementia as something dark, unpleasant, or sinister. For example, what if we thought of dementia as a focus of consciousness? Focus is a photography technique used to highlight the parts you particularly want to show. If we think of dementia as focus, it's a state in which you appear confused, as you are trying to highlight things that are important to you, and unimportant things are not working out properly. This causes inconvenience to those around you. However, it is natural that people must make choices about what to do and what to discard. However, the criteria for making these choices are different from before. The person's consciousness is focused. Eventually, those around them will perceive it as out of focus. Isn't dementia a state like that? Changing our values about dementia, it's part of the natural course of life. As we age, brain activity becomes reduced and limited. Accompanying this is a change in consciousness, where we focus on the good and cut out the unnecessary. This manifests itself in both behavioral and mental aspects. Senility is part of this process. That's what I think. For example, even if someone is quite senile, I feel that their so-called religious faith doesn't disappear. I've never heard of anyone doing anything violent towards a Buddhist altar. If this can be a stopper to stop the fading of faith, then perhaps that could be considered a hope. I don't want to see senility as abnormal. Senility is part of the natural flow of life. That's how I want to see it. To do this, we need to make a major shift in our values regarding senility. It would be normal to see senility as an absolute negative and do whatever we can to keep it out of our lives. Instead, I would like to take a light-hearted approach, like the line from the Awa Odori dance, bright blur and dark blur. If it's the same blur, it has to be bright, sun. Accept the phenomenon of dementia as normal. Far from accepting it, dementia may actually be a style of defense as humans age, something that could be called a focus of consciousness. Are there any benefits to dementia? For example, when you read a documentary-style book like A University of Tokyo Professor Develops Early Onset Alzheimer's, Wakai Kitsuko, Kodansha, 2022, which describes the process of dementia, you begin to think that there really is such a thing as the power of dementia. I would like to explore this point further here. Perhaps we can even suggest some benefits of dementia. If we accept dementia as something valuable in this way, the only remaining issue with dementia should be one of technique, how to cover up its negative aspects. I'd like to introduce some of the boke techniques that I use for fun. The anxiety many people have about dementia, why anti-boke is so popular. I think there were three major themes that were popular in books questioning how to live after the war. The first was how to live. This was a major theme in the post-war period. For example, existentialist writers such as Shina Rinzo and Noma Hiroshi, and many other people, began to explore the meaning of life. This era continued. Then, after life, the theme of death emerged. I think the influence of views on life and death, and education to prepare for death, proposed by German philosopher Alphonse Deakin, a professor at Sophia University, was significant. Various thinkers and writers discussed death, and people began to think about it. Next came the health boom. I believe this is a phenomenon that naturally arose from the theme of how to move away from death. Now that the trend for the topic of health has died down, the topic of aging is gaining momentum with incredible momentum. And within the topic of aging, one topic that is attracting particularly great attention is senility. Senility is generally thought of as dementia. However, people often casually talk about it, saying things like, "That person has recently started to show signs of senility." The word senility does not have the same clear opposition as death or aging, as an enemy of life, and instead gives the impression of containing a slightly more relaxed feeling. However, there is no doubt that many people are worried that they will one day become senile or develop dementia. This is not limited to the elderly. People in their 40s and 50s begin to lose the ability to remember proper nouns. I think there is also great anxiety among the working generation that they will fall behind in competitive society if they become senile. In this era of what is said to be a 100-year lifespan, anti-aging, or resistance to the physical decline that comes with age, has been attracting attention. Similarly, I feel there's been a boom in anti-senility, a resistance to dementia that focuses on what can be done to prevent it and how to overcome it. Accepting and coming to terms with aging, how to care for your declining body. Regarding anti-aging, I've always said, humans will inevitably age. Life is about managing as the body deteriorates with age. I'm not at all a party to health fads that deny aging, including anti-aging. That's why I prefer the word yosei, care, rather than health methods. How can we care for the little time we have left, or our aging bodies? The word yosei comes from accepting aging, not denying it. Health methods are fundamentally anti-aging, but yosei is not. While health methods are medical or scientific information, healthcare is born from the wisdom of life. In other words, it's about how to come to terms with a declining body. This is the philosophy of aging that lies behind it. But when I say philosophy, it's not difficult at all, and in fact it's very simple. For example, when I was in my late 80s, I started to feel unbearable pain in my left leg, so I finally went to a hospital other than a dentist for the first time in 70 years since the war. I was diagnosed with osteoarthritis of the knee, and the doctor told me, "You also have osteoarthritis of the hip." These are symptoms that come with aging, he said. Physical decline manifests itself physically, one by one, in these clear ways. There are also numbers that can clearly show physical decline. For example, with eyesight, your eyesight may have gone from 1.5 to 0.2, and you can tell how much you're declining just by looking at the numbers. Even without a hearing test, hearing decline will be evident in the volume of your television. In my case, compared to the height listed on my old passport, I'm now about 2 centimeters shorter. Furthermore, because I walk mainly on my right leg to protect my painful left leg, my legs are now uneven in length. When I get massages, people often say, "Your legs are a little uneven, your left leg is about 1 centimeter shorter." I see this concrete manifestation of physical decline as a natural rhythm, a natural flow. So I have no intention of resisting it. I simply accept my physical decline and try to live with it as smoothly as possible, living with it. For example, I use a cane to cover up the problem with my left leg when I walk. So I study every day how to use a cane in the most rational way. Furthermore, as for the unevenness between my left and right legs, while some people compensate for it by changing the height of their shoe heels, I have had all my regular trousers altered and have tried to cover it by shortening my left leg by 1 centimeter. These are my thoughts and practices on aging. Aging of the body and mind is a natural law. Don't resist it and practice becoming more senile. Just as the body changes with age, it's inevitable that emotions, reason, and mental activity will change as well. The human mind changes whether we like it or not. In other words, just like the body ages and declines, the aging and decline of the mind can also be said to be a natural law. The human body and mind decline with age to such an extent that it makes you feel strange. I don't think there is anyone who doesn't acknowledge this fact. I myself often find myself laughing at myself these days, thinking, what a mistake I've made. Humans will inevitably age and decline. This is a solemn fact, but it is also a humorous fact. Longevity is certainly a good thing. However, it is a longevity that comes within the process of gradual decline. We cannot help but acknowledge this fact. It's often said that we remain young even when we're old, but how do we live our lives while acknowledging that our bodies and minds are aging and declining? Perhaps this is the kind of question we need in an era of 100-year lifespans. In many cases, mental or psychological problems such as declining memory, inconsistent behavior, and inability to control emotions, which are often described as dementia, occur in conjunction with physical decline. Perhaps the greatest fear is a type of dementia that makes one no longer human while still alive. That's why, rather than adopting an anti-dementia mentality that sees dementia as an evil to be eradicated, resisted, or denied, perhaps we should instead think in terms of achieving better dementia.